The following presentation is brought to you by kmmedia.pro. Please visit kmmedia.pro for more information. Now stay right where you are as we present Welcome to Positive Talk Radio, evolving ideas one conversation at a time. Great guests, dynamic stories and interviews, plus new thoughts on a wide range of topics and concepts. I hope that you'll hang with me, Kevin McDonald, my friends, and of course, you. As together we work to understand why we are all here and what we can do to make our world a better place for all of us. To be happy, be kind, and live in peace together. Yep, that's Positive Talk Radio. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Positive Talk Radio. We've got a great show for you today. Well, I say that all the time, but I mean it all the time. I really do, because I really enjoy the guests that we have on. And Michele is a returning veteran of the podcast wars, and she's been here a number of times. And I keep having her back because her topic is so expansive and has such a big deal that there is so much to talk about with it, and it affects all of us at one point or another. And she is the boss and the head bottle washer of Soaring Spirits International, which is a widow and widower support group that helps people reconnect with each other so that they can deal with all of the issues that have gone on before and really begin to understand and to live life again. Because I think it takes somebody that has gone through it themselves, which you did many years ago now. And if you want to look at those stories, just search for Michele Hernandez or Neff Hernandez on the Positive Talk Radio or my Independence Report, and you will find her for some of those episodes. They're all really, really good. But I don't want to tread on the old ground. I want to explore new ground with you. But first, how are you today?
I'm so good, and I love being here and hanging out on Positive Talk Radio with you. I think that what's interesting is that when you were talking, I was thinking, the reason that I keep coming back is because we have a great time. And it's funny to say that because of the topic that we discuss. But it is true. Nonetheless, I feel like we do always have a great time together. And I don't doubt that today will be the same, despite the fact that we'll be talking about a challenging topic.
Yes, indeed. Well, I had no idea until I just read the post that Emily wrote. Emily Van Houwer, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Vielhauer? Is it Vielhauer?
I believe you got that right. Yes.
Yes. And she wrote on September 12th, 2022, which was this past Monday. My birthday was on the 11th. And yeah, so I'm a 9/11 baby.
That's right. Happy birthday to you.
Well, thank you so much. And she just did this post, and I did not know, and I'm sure a lot of people in our audience don't know that September is Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, or Suicide Prevention Awareness Month.
There you go.
And
yeah. So let me just say that, what Emily does for Soaring Spirits. So Soaring Spirits is the organization I work for, and we host a blog that is written every day. And it's written every day by a different widowed person. And Emily has had the experience of a suicide death. And so she writes for her blog weekly. And she took, as you said, the blog that she wrote, she took the time to talk about suicide prevention awareness. And I also want to just note for people that sometimes one of the things that's hard for anyone who's experienced a suicide death is hearing those words, suicide prevention awareness, because, there's a sense that maybe you could have done something about it. And so while we both want to lean into the ability to be aware of our friends and our family's emotional state, we also want to be aware that sometimes every effort that we've made and everything we've done to try to help and or maybe things we didn't even know were going on with our person still can lead to their suicide death. And so suicide prevention awareness is not about trying to express that people should have the ability to stop someone from taking their lives, but more this sense of awareness that suicide is, I didn't know that we would be talking about this today. Otherwise, I would maybe have some statistics for you, but suicide is a growing cause of death. And, many of us know somebody, and in fact, all of us know somebody, because either we know someone personally or we've heard of the, very big stories that have happened. Robin Williams, as an example, people who are known to us in, the broader community and whose lives ended in suicide in a way that was surprising to us.
You're so right. You're so right. By the way, I want to get this number out early, and we want to get it out often. There is a national suicide prevention hotline, and that number is 988. Is that all there is? Is it just 988?
I don't know the answer to that. And so we should double check before the end of the episode. We'll confirm that. But I know that there is a new line for suicide, that people have come out to make it easier to make sure that you can get help.
I think that's why it's kind of like 911.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly
Only
right.
it's 988, and
Yep, you're right. It is 988. I just confirmed with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that's 988 is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So you just push 988.
And I was reading her blog, and it's okay to talk a little bit about her blog because obviously it's in
It's
the public
public. Yeah.
domain. But her husband passed away, and they had 3 boys that were between the ages of 8 and 13, I believe. And it's so you wonder the depth of the pain that was going on in his soul that would cause him to leave his family that way.
Mhm.
And you feel sorry. I feel sorry for people that not only for them that do it, that have that happen to them, but the people that they leave behind. I've
Yeah.
been around a couple, and it is devastating. It's devastating for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I love your heart because you're able to see that, the people who take their lives are in pain, that there is some kind of mental health crisis, either an ongoing one or an unexpected one that we didn't know about, that makes a person believe that the best course of action, in, despite all evidence to the contrary, is that they would end their life. Because so often, we'll have the experience of people saying, "Oh, that's the most selfish thing you can do." And while, that's a very common conversation around suicide. How dare you? I'm not going to grieve you even because you made this selfish decision. And whatever it was that led, to the time of crisis, that you, instead of sticking it out, you took the easy way out. And I just want to clarify, like, I always think of it like this, when you hold your breath and your body fights you to breathe. And so we are actually predestined, we are set to live. And when you have to have something so big and so painful to overcome that natural desire to live. And then if you add to it, like, for example, Emily's husband, he had a beautiful wife and 3 boys. There's no understanding what could have made him feel that ending his life was the better option than spending time with his family, whatever that was. And here's one of the challenges of suicide death, right? We're never going to know. We can't know definitively what he was thinking. And that is what surviving people of someone who died by suicide live with, is that question of, like, how, how they felt about what unanswered questions they have. But you have to imagine that whatever it was that would cause him to do that was so significantly painful that he determined. And sometimes it's logical and sometimes it's not logical at all. Sometimes it can even be a rash response to something, really, really intense. That's why sometimes you'll hear people say, suicide is a final solution to a temporary problem. And
Yes.
so, that sense of like, if, trying to get people to hang in long enough to see if there's a better way to resolve whatever pain they're in. And those kind of, but as you said, understanding what would make someone feel that that was the best outcome is really, really challenging. And I think one of the things that's most difficult for families and loved ones to try to grapple with.
I don't know about you, but I will sit here and I will tell you that there have been times in my life that were particularly low, and
Mhm.
I felt lonely, and I had been maybe dumped by a lover, or I'd lost my job and I had no money. And I have at times contemplated that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But what keeps me from it is like, oh, let's see, I can hang my,
How?
oh, that would hurt.
Yeah.
I don't want that to
Right.
hurt. And I can't,
Yeah.
and I could jump somewhere, and I don't want to jump either. I don't want to, that would hurt. So it's like at the end of the day, I it never got to the point where
Yeah.
I would say I don't care. I just can't
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, and that speaks to, right, what must be, that driving force to make that choice. I think that the other piece, for me, is that a lot of times after the person dies by suicide, and it cannot be understood, and there will never be a final answer to any of the many questions that might surround what led to that choice. But the people who most often suffer the the shame and the ongoing pain of that choice are the loved ones who survive that person, and for whom people start saying things like, "Oh, what a selfish choice." I'll tell you that there was a conversation that was shared with me that I've been gifted the opportunity to speak about, where one person says to another person, "Oh, how did your person die?" And she says, "He died by suicide." And the response to that was, "Oh, well, he must not have loved you that much, huh?"
Oh my.
Right? Because sometimes these are the things that we think. And, what must that feel like to have, because first of all, I would be willing to bet that she'd ask herself that question. What was it? Why couldn't he choose to stay with me? And when we, as people who are hearing about these deaths, respond, if we can be use care with what we say, because the thing is, we think that we're disparaging the person who died, which is a whole other subject, right? We've
Right.
talked about how much pain they must be in, the mental health crisis that likely caused this. Okay, we set that aside for a minute. But when you start saying things about someone's loved one who died by suicide, you're not hurting them, you're hurting the person that you're talking to. And the person you're talking to is already hurting and already has questions and already may have thought of many of the things you've already said and things that are much worse, because they are struggling with the reality of what their life looks like right now as a result of a choice that they didn't make, but they must live with. And so, we as a community can do a great service to people who are the survivors of a suicide by tempering what we say and by even thinking about it. She had thought, and so the beautiful end to that story, by the way, is that the person who was asked that question said, he actually really struggled with mental health. And I don't think it had anything to do with how much he loved me. And the person who had first said it realized what she'd said and was like, oh, I can't believe I just said that. And so they got to have a good conversation about, when someone says that to you, how does that sound? How does it feel? She didn't intend to cause harm. She thought she spoke the first thing that came into her head. And so I just always ask that when we're talking to people, any griever really, but in particular, someone who's grieving a suicide death, to think about, to say the question in your mind out loud before it comes out of your mouth, and wonder, like, how would it feel if someone asked me this question? Here's another side tip. I know you didn't ask for, but I'm just going to offer some unsolicited advice if you don't mind.
Please, I don't mind
Um,
at all.
I
This is
appreciate that. I love that about you, Kevin. But it's just that, what's the first thing that everybody wants to know in a suicide death? How did they kill themselves? That's the first thing. And so often, as a suicide survivor, the first thing people say is, how did they do it? And so, you don't want to recount that. You don't want to recount that. And at the end, it doesn't matter. What matters, of course, is that we are, grieving a person we love. And so another just good tip is try to refrain from asking the question, oh, how did they die? Because, that's the salacious bit, right? That's the piece where people, every suicide death of any kind of celebrity, any well-known person, the first question is always, how did they die? Because people want those details. But it's a very painful question to ask someone who has survived that. First of all, you don't know what the circumstances were. Maybe that person literally was the one to find them. And you asking that question brings up immediately, takes them right back to that moment, which was so painful and life altering in every way. And there's also a case where some people don't know. And so then that brings that whole thing up as well. So, just if we can as a community say, one way we're going to support people who have experienced a suicide death is by not asking them the kind of questions that might take them right back to a moment that was so, so painful.
I can't imagine it. It's bad enough when you lose a loved one in like an automobile accident
Mm,
or a cancer death or something like that that you don't have a lot of. But suicide is so sudden, and
yeah.
it's like here and then gone, and especially if you find them and they're in your
Mhm.
house and whatever, and then the arrangements and then talking to people and
Mhm.
family and friends. I can
Yeah.
only imagine how devastating it is for someone to go through that. So I my first advice is if you are feeling suicidal in any way, call 988, number one. Number two, get mental help. It's okay these days to go to a counselor and to seek mental help because you're feeling depressed, you're feeling like you're to the end of your rope, whatever it is. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling that way, call 988, please,
Yeah.
because it will pass. You know,
Yeah.
I told you before the story of my brother-in-law. He was 42 and
Mhm.
I'm now 65. We were the same age.
Mm.
He's missed 23 years of beautiful life on this planet, wa watching the Seahawks win a Super Bowl, watching, the different things in life. The
Yeah.
kids grow up, the nephews, he my son was adored him, and they would have had a
Mhm.
great relationship. And so when if you are feeling that way, it will end. It will get better. Call 988. That will help.
Yeah. And I think, it's also just really worth saying out loud to anyone who's struggling, it's okay to struggle.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that, everybody struggles. It just doesn't seem like other people might be struggling. And so that also makes it true that sometimes, because a lot of times there is a sense for suicide survivors, people who've survived the death of someone they love by suicide, that they should have known or that there were obvious signs that they somehow missed. And imagine, you ask yourself the question, did I miss it? Was there something I should have seen? How could I have made a difference? And so for people who are struggling now, just know that there are, going to ask for help is a first step in dealing with whatever it is that is making, that makes you feel like maybe dying is a better opportunity for you. And, that's hard for people to understand, but that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of other people feeling that way and they're just not talking about it. And many times the assumption that somebody knew that there was a struggle, a mental health struggle going on is actually incorrect. Sometimes there's no sign of it and people are suffering in silence. So if you are suffering in silence, 988 is a great place to start looking for a support network that can help you make your way through tiny step by tiny step, whatever it is you're struggling with today.
I'd also like to point out that if you are someone that's listening to us and has been touched personally by suicide, go to Soaring Spirits International and connect with them because they work with people who are widowed and that have felt the same way that you may be feeling now. And they get the support that they need. And that is so vital. When you lose a loved one, you need love to come from somewhere, and you need
Mhm.
understanding and people who know, who've been through what you've been through, which is why your organization is so special.
Well, we really we recognize too that there are a lot of things that bring us together in our widowed community. So, the fact that we're widowed is one thing. And then beneath that big umbrella of the widowed community, there's a many micro communities. And one of those is the suicide survivors community. And they have a unique understanding of some things that someone who hasn't lived through that experience just couldn't possibly know. And so we build programs to provide that additional support for people who've experienced a suicide death, so that they can connect with someone else who has as well. And that immediately helps you feel a little bit less alone. And it helps you access a unique kind of understanding, because as much as I feel for and have had the opportunity to provide service to and work with widowed people who have experienced the death of their person by suicide, that's not my personal experience. And so there's only so much I can understand. They need to be connected with other people who have experienced a suicide death. And I say that, just globally. So if you are a widowed person, Soaring Spirits International could be the place for you. But I also want to point to, there are a variety of suicide survivor organizations for any other family member that you may have experienced, or friends. Many of our teenagers are struggling with a friend having taken their life, and they're trying to place that within their growing understanding of the world. And so seeking out other people who have had a suicide death in their life really does make a difference to your ability to process, to heal, and to, put some perspective around a death that doesn't have an explanation that's going to be neat and tidy, in the way that if someone dies by cancer, or my husband died in a cycling accident, I have no question how or why he died. I know what happened. I know why he died. For suicide survivors, oftentimes that sort of certainty is just not possible.
And many times it's an impulsive thing. It's a spur of the moment kind of thing. It's not necessarily all planned out. As you
Mhm.
referenced Robin Williams, in his case, he said good night to his wife, and they were sleeping in separate bedrooms for whatever reason. And he said goodbye or good night to her, and then he went into his own room and he did that. He had planned on that, apparently. But a lot of times it's a fit of anger. It can be a fit of deep despair. I really feel sorry for people that are
Mhm.
feeling so despondent about life that they're willing to end it, especially when you've got Emily's husband. You have so much to live for. Three
Mhm.
ne- three teen, three teenage kids, a beautiful wife, a life, and I just can't imagine the depth of the despair that he was in.
And that, I think, it is what it keeps coming back to. And I do want to just circle quickly back to Robin Williams, because it was later discovered that he was struggling with Lewy body dementia.
Right.
And, there are just so many pieces to suicide death that we can never understand how our brain works. What kind of chemical reactions are we having? Is it related to a disease like Robin Williams? Is it related to medication? Like, I know a person who had a really strong reaction to a medication, and, you've read on the bottle, sometimes it says, suicidal thoughts are a possibility. And so, those actually do happen. People do. And so, I feel like with suicide death, there's this sense that there's one, that there's a reason, there's a specific reason why someone and chose to end their life. And sometimes that is true. And other times there's 100 reasons that could not possibly be understood, including, like I said, medication, disease, a traumatic break of some sort, and or maybe an ongoing struggle with mental health that has finally exhausted the person who feels that they can no longer continue. And so I think it always comes back to the depth of pain that this person is experiencing to have made that choice, either, whether that's in just a moment, or whether it's, response to a suicidal thought that was influenced by a medication. There's no neat bow, right? There's no one thing that we can say, okay, this is what happens in a suicide death. It's a very muddy and complex death experience that more and more people, we could talk about veterans, right? Like the PTSD, all of the things that we're discovering are really deeply embedded in our psyche and sometimes very, very difficult to untangle.
You know, because I think about this from time to time. Whenever I hear about a single car accident of somebody going
Mhm.
off the road or and hitting a tree, or an overdose death, or somebody that what was the third one I was thinking of? The overdose death, and the car accident, and they fall from a you don't know, and you don't know what's in people's hearts and what's in their minds when
Mhm.
that happens, and you just like to, and so I can't stress enough. Go to 988 if you're having troubles, or if you know somebody that's having troubles.
Yeah.
Um, Go do that, and
And the other thing too is if you know somebody and you're worried about them, don't hesitate to ask the question. You know, you get to you if you are able, and I don't mean this to say that it's our responsibility to ensure that people don't take their lives, because that's not possible. But it is definitely possible to make sure that the people in your life know you care about them, and that if they are struggling, you are a person they could come to for support in helping them to find help.
that is a really good point, because I would think, and I don't know everybody, but my sister, when I was having a moment of deep despair, and she asked me, she said, "Are you considering killing yourself?"
Mhm.
And when she said that, I had in my back of my mind, I'd been considering it, but then it was like, well, now the genie's out of the bottle. She knows,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I can't. And then we had a deep, long discussion
Right.
about what
What a
was.
courageous question for her to ask you, and that's, that says, "I care about you, and I'm asking you a direct question about this so that I can make it available for us to discuss if that's something that you are thinking or that you feel confident talking to me about." And that, again, I think that the hardest part for well, I can't say a hard part of the suicide experience is that sense of, could I have done something? Is there something I could have done to influence this? And so I always want to be clear that we cannot be responsible for someone else's life as much as we might want to. We can't be responsible because we need to free our survivors of suicide from the shame of thinking that there's some way they should have done something better to change this outcome. And at the same time, recognize that as humans, we are in it together. And the more often we say that to each other, the more likely it is that someone who is struggling is, just has the right person at the right moment. Your sister asking you right at that time, when it was a thought that was going on in your head, whether it was an active conversation with yourself or not, at least brought it into the light. And then it was like, oh, okay. This is something we can talk about. And so we free ourselves and our loved ones to speak about it when we are willing to ask the question, just as a point of, I'm worried about you and I'm wondering if this is something you're thinking about.
I think a lot of people. Let me backtrack. I think some people uh, um, have a suicide event because they don't think anybody cares.
Mhm.
And if you can dispel that myth, because it really is a myth, if you can dispel that and let people know that, or you let that person know that I care about what happens to you.
Yeah.
A lot of times that can break the dam of the emotions that they're holding in,
Mhm.
and then you can get through it, and
We
it's
also get very much in our head, right? And we can convince ourselves of horrible things. We can convince ourselves that no one cares. We can convince ourselves that we are not worthy of fill in the blank. We can convince ourselves that that the world would be better off without us in it. And those voices in our heads can only be, they are a powerful force. And having other voices in your head who say, I care about you, I love you, again, can we always counteract the outcome? No, we can't. But we certainly can influence and take the opportunity to make sure that people in our lives know we love them and care about them and want to be able to help them inch by inch. Because that's the thing. Sometimes the problems just seem too big to be solved. And, I feel like for someone who maybe is struggling right now, listening to us talk, they're like, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know my life. They don't know, it's like easy for you to say, call 988. But I want to say again, like, the calling of 988 is the beginning of saying, okay, let's talk about, what kind of support can we get to solve whatever the problem is. And sometimes it's not a specific problem. Sometimes it's our heads telling us things that are not true. And get the help that we need to be able to start taking the steps forward towards healing and towards feeling able to continue to remain with your loved ones and the people who care about you.
And sometimes it is so insidious what you say to yourself and the
Mhm.
story that you are telling yourself. I'll give you an example then in again from my life, because I don't have any other examples because I'm not in anybody else's head. But but in
That's
my
probably for the best, Kevin.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. But there was a time when it was like, let's see, through work, I've got this $500,000 life insurance policy,
Mhm.
and I'm working hard, but I'm not making ends meet the way I want to. I
Mhm.
can't meet my obligations, and
Mhm.
I'm doing stuff. It would be better for me just to go and to have them have this $500,000 policy.
Yeah.
And that is so insidious, because if you act on that, the people that you
Mhm.
leave behind love you so much, and it affects them. Those 3 boys are gonna be affected regardless for the rest of their lives. I know a lot of people that have had a parent, commit sui or excuse me, wrong word. A parent, suffers from suicide, and, uh, um, and it affects children generationally.
I'm so proud of you right now because you just changed your language. I'm so proud of you, Kevin. We talked about this and you have it and it's stuck in your head. And I just want to say it for everyone because, you will hear people say this consistently, including people who are survivors of suicide, using the phrase commit suicide. And the reason that we have that in our general consciousness is because that suicide used to be a crime. It
Right.
was a crime to take your life, and so you use the word commit because you were committing a crime. And as we've become more aware of the, struggle of mental health and of the real struggle that people experience as they suffer through, suicidal thoughts, we've stopped using that language in order to start to address the shame that has been attached to suicide death by, instead of saying commit suicide, died by suicide, is an easy way to describe, that type of death, and it helps to remove the stigma that comes with the idea that this person broke the law, which is no longer the case. But it also comes back to look at exactly what you just said about life insurance. Is that during that time you couldn't collect on your life insurance policy if the person who held the policy took their life. And there are still some limitations today on how that works, but I see it's so true that insidious voices can convince us that our loved ones having the money is so much better than our loved ones having us. And I can assure you, from the side of, being on the other side of widowhood myself, and say that there is no amount of money that I would have traded for my husband's life. No amount of money. And so even though that insidious voice is saying, "Oh, but you don't know, lady, you don't know our financial situation. You don't know that we're going to be better." I can tell you for sure that your loved ones would not trade you in for a pile of money. And that, though I can totally understand why that's a voice that might be going on in your head, being able to hear someone say they wouldn't trade you. And that's a really important message.
Previously on another, episode, I talked about one of the, um, people that, suffered suicide that I was part of, and I'm not gonna go back into that here. But what I am gonna go into is that when I went to his house, or his brother's house, the next day, there were 25 relatives there,
Mhm.
and they were all absolutely crushed,
Yeah.
including grandpa, who was, sitting in the chair, and everybody was just, and he didn't recognize that. And
Mhm.
what is it that you think the stories that we get into our head, that we don't
Mhm.
recognize that we are loved by numerous people. And even if you have somebody cheats on you, or decides that they don't want to be married to you anymore, or whatever like that, you still have value. And how do we get that to people, that to break through those barriers?
Well, I think it starts by recognizing, that so often as a society, right? What do we put value on? We put value on money, we put value on status, we put value on, how far we can make it in our careers. But at the end of the day, when someone dies, those are not the things that people talk about. Those are not the things that are valuable. And what are valuable, that fun trip you took with your kids, where you taught them how to go fishing, the family dinners that you had where you played games afterwards, and the interactions with the people in your life, whatever those might look like. But I do think that it's also worth noting that for some people, they just don't feel like they have those. Like, I wonder, would your brother-in-law have been surprised by the people who showed up there? Did he know that those people cared about him? And even if he did, sometimes that pain is so great that being able to acknowledge and let that reality in, that people do care about you, doesn't feel possible. And, oftentimes we blame the person, like, why didn't you know? Or how couldn't you? What did you think was going to happen? How would you do this to the people around you? And I have to believe that there's no value in that. We're allowed to be angry, we're allowed to have our feelings around a suicide death, absolutely. But trying to figure out the hows and whys can make, can is it's just something that is a unique, I think, to suicide death, that the sometimes we have to just know that we're not gonna know. And I think that's a really hard part.
Yeah, well, and it'll make you crazy, because
Mhm.
every day you're thinking, "Well, what did I see it? Could I have stopped it?
Yeah.
Did I know? Did deep down, was I
Mhm.
aware?" And then you start telling your stories. "Well, remember the time that he said, or
Mhm.
that she did this, or what?" And it's insidious, and it just continues on and gets deeper and deeper. And
Yeah.
that's why, if you've suffered from suicide, and or you are somebody that witnessed, or that was a family member, you still need counseling, you just still need help, if you're
Yeah,
still
for sure, and I think, the other thing about that 988 number is that we'll access all kinds of support for people who have either actively considering suicide, have considered suicide, and need some help, and also for loved ones to help be connected to very specific resources around suicide death. Because every time we're grieving a person that we intended to continue to have in our lives, that comes with its own unique challenges. And then when you add the nuance that's associated with how someone died, and in this case, suicide death, being able to find some unique resources to deal with the questions, the shame, the stigma, the things that come up. And even, again, like, this is not about the person who died at this point. At this point, it's about the survivors. And when we use language that's detrimental to their healing, the person who died isn't being hurt by it. Us trying to, berate someone who's dead is not helpful to the person who's listening to you and thinking, that's my person. And yes, I'm allowed to be mad at them. And yes, I might have my own questions. And you might even be saying something that I've thought myself 100 times. But having someone else say that to you, really can shut down relationships and can cause harm where no harm is intended. So if we just tread carefully and offer compassion first and keep our own judgments about someone who took their life to ourselves, it's the best way that we can offer people who have experienced the death of someone they love by suicide support and compassion.
If you're wondering why we're talking about suicide, and you might be if you just tuned in or weren't
Mhm.
listening and paying attention, it's because September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And Friday the 10th is the World Suicide Prevention Day, which was Saturday this year, I believe. And And they also unveiled a new number that you can call. It's very easy. It's 988, just 3 digits, and you can call if you are feeling distraught and if you need help. It's having conversations like this are difficult, Michelle, but they're necessary.
It's so helpful. The thing about suicide death, right, is that we often don't talk about it. And because we don't talk about it, that means that anybody who's struggling with suicidal ideation doesn't really have a format to bring it up because it's not something that we have a regular conversation about. And so, giving and again, I want to continue to stress, because so many people make the assumption that we could have done something specific, but instead, like, this general sense of allowing conversation about suicide means that more and more people might have the opportunity to express how they're feeling, might feel confident in reaching out to someone who has been talking about suicide. Even go home tonight and say, I was listening to this positive talk radio, and they were talking about suicide, and I want to just, ask a question about it, talk about it at the dinner table. Do we know anybody who's experienced a suicide death? Has anybody struggled with ideas of suicide? Because these are not dinner table conversations we typically have. And if we do have them, it offers us the opportunity to, start sharing things that might be helpful, including, you would be really missed if you died, or I'm always here for you. If there's something that you need, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The thing is, I think in our world, we set perfection, as the goal, and no one's perfect. It's not possible to be perfect. And so sometimes I think that striving for perfection is also this ongoing sense of stress that everyone lives with, and that often keeps them from seeking help because they want to continue to appear perfect for the people around them.
People got to know that there's no such thing as perfect, and even Mary Poppins wasn't perfect.
That's
Uh,
exactly right.
but the other thing that surprises me, and maybe you can help me understand it a little bit, is when somebody does have a suicide episode and they pass away. A lot of times the newspapers don't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
The media doesn't want to talk about it. They won't say what happened to that individual. And so do you think that's a good thing, or does that just kind of push it underneath the rug?
Well, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned that, because so often when they don't tell you how someone died, it typically does turn out to be suicide.
Right.
And I think that there's a couple layers to that. One, as you said, sometimes you're not certain. There is a cause of death, and whether or not it was intentional is sometimes unclear. And I think secondarily, because of the way that we treat suicide in our country, in the US in particular, the stigma and the shame around it, I think that the more publicly we speak about it, the more often we're able to process it as a community, the better able we are to support people who both might be suicidal and also those who have experienced the death of a loved one. But I think there is some level of protection for the family also. And so I am always a fan of protecting people who need some time to be able to process what's happened. And in a suicide death, just think about Naomi Judd. That was a recent suicide death, very surprising, not immediately reported as a suicide. And yet her family decides to come forward and talk about it because she'd been struggling with mental health consistently for many, many years. And from the interviews that I saw, it seemed to me that the understanding was, we worried that this day would come, because there seemed like there was going to be a point where she couldn't hold on anymore. And I thought that that was just a really compassionate way of recognizing the strain and the struggle that can be sometimes associated with mental health and mental illness. And at the same time, right, of all people, to wonder if they were loved. And, if to get the public acclaim, we all think of that's going to be the thing that would keep us alive. But in this case, even that wasn't enough for her to feel like she could continue to carry the pain of her mental illness.
The another case that comes to mind, and this goes way back, and so you probably won't even remember him, but he was in a TV series called Chico and the Man,
Mm.
and his name was Freddie Prinze.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
for by the way, that's Freddie Prinze Jr.'s father,
Right.
and he was 21, 22 years old. He was a stand-up comic. He had a show on
Mhm.
TV. He had the world was seemingly at his feet,
Mhm.
and yet something was so in him had such despair
Yeah.
that he ended up taking his own life, and that can happen, and nobody, I don't recall if anybody said, well, he had a lot of mental illness and that was why
Right.
he did it, but sometimes it's hidden, and
Yeah.
so you can't
Yeah.
blame yourself if somebody does something that seems so out of character for them,
Mhm.
but they're just in such pain.
Well, and, as you said, since we're talking about, suicide prevention awareness, the word prevention for people who have experienced a suicide death can be difficult. But the thought of awareness, I think, is critical to changing and shifting the narrative around suicide death. Because, you have everything from someone like a celebrity who seemingly, as you said, the world is their oyster. And why would they take their life? Speaking to that just points to whatever it was must have been really bad for them to feel like this. But then it also speaks to the lies we tell ourselves. Naomi Judd specifically struggled with whether she was good enough. And yet, everything that you would look at, seemed to point to the fact that she was more than good enough, that she had this huge career. And so, it comes back to the voices sometimes in our own head and the narrative that we adopt about ourselves that sometimes pushes us into, a mental health crisis that ends in suicide death. And so being aware of that and talking about that as a community, talking about the way we speak to ourselves, talking about, that it's not just about suicide is complex. It doesn't, it's different for every single person. There's no way we can say this is how you avoid it. But what we can do is talk about it so that people feel like there is a space for discussion and a space for finding ways to support people who are suicidal and changing the narrative around suicide death so that survivors have access to the kind of tools and resources they need to be able to heal in the aftermath of a really, really life altering and devastating experience.
That what you just said is just brilliant, and we're going to make a short out of this episode and put it up on because it needs to be out there more. And even if it's just, when we talk about suicide prevention awareness, even if you're just aware that that possibility at any given time can exist for all of us,
Yeah, absolutely right.
it's
And
so
in particular
absolutely.
for people that you love, and for, to normalize that people sometimes do feel desperate, sometimes could feel suicidal, and being able to speak about that can influence the outcome. So, being able to, it won't always, but it can. And that's what the awareness piece is about and the prevention piece is about. And so many times, there's this sense, especially in the widowed suicide community, that, it somehow is the fault. We started at the top of the hour with me telling the story of a woman who said, oh, he must not have loved you that much if he took his life, because we forget that it is more complex than we could ever understand. And we simplify it in ways that can be painful for people who have experienced that type of death, whether it is a spouse or partner or a child or a friend or a coworker. So often there is a private struggle that we don't know about. And by speaking about suicide prevention awareness, we have that, just that kind of niggling idea like, oh, you're right. This could be a reality for someone I know right now who could be influenced by hearing this conversation or by you saying, hey, I've noticed you're really quiet lately. I'm just a little worried about you. Do you need to talk about anything? How are you doing? Just being more aware of the people around us and reaching out when something seems amiss.
And just, yeah, just, and don't, you know, I've said this to my kids, and don't be afraid to use the words, "Are you feeling like ending your life.
Mhm.
Because if you're feeling that way, then by all means, let's
Yeah.
go get you some help.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so it's important. It's important. This has been a marvelous discussion, and I want to thank you for it, Michelle.
Yeah, I appreciate that you make space for some of these difficult conversations. And I, again, want to say to everyone, the reason that we talk about it is to open up, our minds to the fact that there is no one reason anyone would take their life. And also to give us the space for remembering that the way we speak to people who have experienced a suicide death can help or harm their future healing. And so when we use language that avoids the word commit, when we use language that supports rather than judges, then we have the opportunity to be a force for good for people who are struggling with a really what often feels like an impossible situation in the aftermath of losing someone they love to suicide.
See, and the thing is, Michelle, what you do and what I do in different ways are both designed to help people and people that we may not ever even meet.
Yeah.
There are people that are working with your organization, Soaring Spirits International, that because it's becoming a big deal. This organization of yours that
Well,
started out
yeah,
in the garage of your house.
that's exactly right. Yeah. And what we're working towards is just continuing to build communities for widowed people in which they can heal. And that work, I always tell people, we are not curing a disease. We're instead offering to walk alongside people as they heal and evolve through a grief experience. And so that work is ongoing work. And we are actively working to ensure that any widowed person who comes to us has access to both relevant resources and research-based programs, all held within a compassionate community that will help them not only process their grief, but rebuild a life of meaning for themselves in the aftermath.
I'd like to say that your organization is going to stamp out widowhood.
I do too.
But
If I had a magic wand, Kevin, that would absolutely be what we would do.
the fact of the matter is that it is part of life,
Yeah,
and how we deal with it is as important as anything else. And if
yeah.
and organizations like yours and talking about suicide on this show, if we can impact somebody to say, well, maybe I won't today, or they call 988 and get some help,
Mhm.
or they have a friend or a neighbor or a buddy that it seems down, and they ask that question, are you feeling okay, can I help you? And you're not you're and that question eventually will lead into, you're not thinking about taking your own life, are you? And
Mhm.
I think we need to talk about that
Yeah,
rather than skirt around the topic.
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that question allows people, the opportunity to speak about it. And speaking about it can sometimes make a difference. And so, I really feel like that's what suicide prevention awareness is about. And it's about normalizing conversations about suicide death and removing the judgment that comes with assuming that suicide death is about one specific thing or because of one specific thing. When really, truly, as humans, we're complex and every circumstance is complex. And suicide death certainly is one of the most complex experiences we can make our way through.
I was looking at your website, and I was looking at some of the pictures,
Hmm.
and first of all, it's great that everybody's together and they're smiling and they're feeling good. But I was looking at it, going, "Holy crap! There's a lot of young people here."
Yeah. Average age of the people we serve is 53. So, when you think,
That's now. I didn't think at one time. I didn't think 53 was young. Now I'm thinking 53 is like really
yeah,
barely out of
yeah,
teens.
especially when you consider that's the average age. And so, we have a significant number of people on either side of that age to come to that average. And, I think that's the other thing for Soaring Spirits. We work at reframing what widowhood looks like. I was widowed at 35 and I once did an interview I had done the interview portion with the reporter. The photographer was coming later. He knocked on the door. I opened it. He asked for Michele. I said, "I'm Michele." He said, "No, the widow Michele." Because he was not expecting a 35-year-old person. He was expecting, a much older person, I assume. And so, that's another thing that we're shifting. Everybody knows somebody who died way too young. It's just that we forget that often that person is partnered, and that might likely mean that they also have a young partner. And so, changing the way people look at the widowed experience is part of the work that we do. And those pictures of our community, and I'll tell you, the reason they're smiling is because they're together, is because they found their people, because they feel that they are in a safe space. They have had some compassionate understanding available to them. They might have been crying 5 minutes ago, and then 5 minutes later they're laughing. And in that space, that toggle of emotion is not only welcome, it's common. And so, what you see in the faces on our website is not people who are pretending that widowhood is not hard. It's people who have agreed, yes, widowhood is hard, and it makes a difference when you have people to walk alongside you while you do it.
We as a society are so silly sometimes because we don't we hide certain things. I'll give you an example. I was reading an article about baby boomers, and they were giving statistics as to who was living as a single person, who was married, and so forth, and and they kept on bringing up that more and more singles, retired people that are baby boomers, they're women, and they're women that are living alone, but they don't ever say these are people that have been recently widowed, that their husband that had been with them for 40 or 50
Mm.
years has passed away. And that is a segment of the population that I think is really underserved, and that's why your organization is so helpful. And I live in a 55 plus community. There are people here that I have never met. They don't
Yeah.
know their place.
Right. It's easy to be isolated. And it's in particular easy to be isolated during grief because you don't feel like your best self. You don't necessarily have the energy to get out. You might be feeling like leaving the house without your person, is too big of a job, and also makes you miss them more. And so oftentimes people just sort of hunker down. And I'll say that's been one of the blessings of having an expanded virtual program, is that for people who are struggling to leave their house, we have created ways for them to be able to still connect with others. And just hearing voices and seeing other faces is like, okay, I'm not the only widowed person. I see that there is a community here, and they have the opportunity to access resources right from their own home.
I had to laugh yesterday. A good friend of mine, because it was my birthday on Sunday, on the 11th,
Mhm.
and he said, I'll come on Thursday, and we'll go out to dinner, and we'll go to a movie and stuff, because I live alone. I generally don't. I don't go to movies by myself because I don't want to have that big old bucket of popcorn and a big pop and go down the aisle and have somebody going, "Oh, that poor man. He doesn't have any friends. He's by himself," and stuff. And there may be a movie that I just want to see. So we went out, we had dinner, and we went to a movie. And as we were walking into the theater, I said to him, "Do you know how many people are looking at us saying, 'Well, there's a nice gay couple'?"
Which you prefer over them saying, "Look at that sad sack guy with the big box of popcorn on his own." And
Exactly.
let's all remind ourselves, especially since we're talking about suicide prevention awareness, let's all remind ourselves that we tell ourselves stories about what other people think of us all the time. And the truth might be completely opposite of what we're thinking. And so just remember that, be whatever it is that you say in your own head, it's not always the truth.
And well, I'll amend that. It's hardly ever the truth, because
That's
you have
true.
your own prejudice involved and your
Yep,
own thoughts about it and
yep.
stuff. And so just, and that's, we are all one, just let it be. And the gospel according to Paul McCartney, just let it be. And take people as they are, and care about people. And if you see somebody that's down, try and help lift them up, or at
Yeah.
least tell them to call 988.
And
And
offering ourselves and each other as much grace as we can, because life is complicated. But on the other side of complicated is beautiful. And so if we can find a way to keep making our way through the complicated and allow the beautiful to sit beside it, then we have a great opportunity to experience things that we might never have imagined.
If when I was 22, I had thought and followed through on what I was thinking at the time, I would not be here today and we would not be having this conversation. That's how important it is for everybody to live your life fully and at the end of the day, to not have any regrets. I believe personally that when somebody suffers from suicide, unless it's a mental disorder, which I think happens more often than we admit in our society, that they regret that decision that they made and would like to reverse it if they could.
Yeah. Well, and therein lies the challenge of being a suicide survivor, is that there's no way to know for sure. But what we can say is that knowing that someone cares sometimes makes all the difference. So make sure the people around you know that you care, both for you and for them. And that's just all good, no matter what.
Now, I'm going to set myself aside, and I want you to tell our audience, the ones that are listening now and the ones that will be listening far, far, far into the future, anything you'd like them to know.
Well, if you are a person who is widowed yourself, or you know someone who's widowed who is in need of support, Soaring Spirits International is here to help. You can find us at soaringspirits.org. Our flagship program is called Camp Widow, and it's such a big program. It has its own website, so that's campwidow.org. But of course, they all lead into each other. But more than anything, the work of Soaring Spirits is about rebuilding and about creating a meaningful life for ourselves. And I think sometimes in grief, it feels impossible to imagine that you would have a meaningful life. And I know that for many grievers, suicidal ideation is a real thing. And so, surrounding yourself with as much support as you can while you grieve, and immersing yourself in a community of support that can provide you with tools and resources for rebuilding is a really positive step in creating a healing space in which you can evolve. So we welcome you. We welcome any person who's experienced the death of a person they thought they were going to spend their life with. So we have a very broad definition of the word widowed. You don't have to be married. You don't have to be in any sort of relationship, gay, straight, polyamorous. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're in. If you have experienced the death of a partner, you thought that partner was your person, you're welcome in our programs.
That's outstanding. And again, Michele Neff Hernandez, excuse me.
That was a good, I liked that pronunciation though.
Hernandez. And go to soaringspiritsinternational.com and get all the information that you can. And I want to thank Michele. She's going to be back on the show again, because this has been an hour and it seems like 5 minutes.
It flies right by. Like I said, I feel like a returning character, so I'm excited about it.
you are the information that you have and the heart that you bring to it is just amazing, and I really appreciate you.
And I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you'll wait right there, I'll be right back. Hey, thanks for enjoying this episode all the way to the end. Please give us a like and subscribe to this channel. This has been a production of PositiveTalkRadio.net. Please visit our website, oddly named PositiveTalkRadio.net, for more details about us and our mission, which is to provide great positive programming designed to inspire us all. I'm Kevin McDonald, and I'm proud of these shows, and I truly hope that you'll like them and share them with friends and family. So on behalf of our entire team, remember, be kind to one another, because each other's all we got.